You don't walk away from me." His hand closed around her throat before she finished her next breath. Officer Dale Morrow slammed Nurse Claire Donnelly into the metal cabinet with full force. Not a shove, not a warning, a choke. His badge catching the fluorescent light of the emergency room while a tray of instruments exploded across the floor. The entire ER froze. Doctors, nurses, patients. Every single person in that hallway stopped moving and said absolutely nothing. Nobody called for help. Nobody stepped forward. Because Dale Morrow had 19 years, a badge, and board members in his phone. He had done this before, and he had always walked away clean. He had no idea a Navy Admiral had just parked his car outside. If you're watching this right now, please take a second to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning, because this story didn't start with a chokehold. It started with a lie. Claire Donnelly had worked the night shift at Mercy General Hospital in Charleston, South Carolina for 11 years. She had seen things that would break most people. She had held the hands of dying strangers. She had worked 36 hours straight without complaint. She had watched residents younger than her sons make mistakes that cost lives, and she had covered for them, corrected them, guided them, not because anyone asked her to, but because that was who she was. She was the kind of nurse other nurses called when they didn't know what to do. She was the kind of woman who never asked for recognition, never chased promotions, never played political games inside a hospital that had more politics than most city halls. Her supervisor, Diane Marsh, once told her, "Claire, you are the backbone of this department." And Claire had smiled, said thank you, and gone right back to work. That was 3 months ago. Tonight, standing in the break room at the start of her shift, Claire poured herself a cup of coffee that she knew she would never finish and tried to prepare herself for whatever the next 12 hours would bring. She didn't have to wait long. The radio on the wall crackled. The front desk called. And the first words Claire heard were the ones that always sent adrenaline straight into her bloodstream. Multi-vehicle accident. 3 incoming. ETA 4 minutes. She put the coffee down and started moving. The ER at Mercy General was not a quiet place on any given night, but on this particular Tuesday in November, it was already past capacity. Beds were filled. Hallways had overflow patients on gurneys. The waiting room had people standing along the walls, and the staff, bone-tired, understaffed, and stretched to their absolute limit, was running on fumes and discipline. Claire stepped into the controlled chaos like she had done 1,000 times before. She checked on her patients. She reviewed charts. She coordinated with the attending physician on duty, Dr. Marcus Webb, who nodded at her with the kind of silent respect that meant, "I'm glad you're here tonight." And then the trauma bays opened up, and the accident victims came in, and Claire stopped thinking about anything except the work. For the next 90 minutes, she didn't stop moving. A woman with a broken collarbone and internal bleeding, a teenage boy with a severe concussion, an elderly man whose heart was behaving in a way that required immediate attention and calm hands, both of which Claire provided without being asked. She stabilized, she assisted, she advocated. She did the job that most people never see and almost no one ever thanks you for. And then, somewhere around 9:45, the ER doors opened again. But this time, it wasn't a patient. Officer Dale Morrow walked in like he owned the place. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, mid-40s. He had a way of moving through a space that made other people instinctively step aside. Not out of respect, but out of something closer to self-preservation. His uniform was pressed. His jaw was set, and his eyes swept the room like he was cataloging every person in it and deciding how much trouble each one of them was worth. Claire recognized him. She had seen him before. A few months back, he'd brought in a suspect, a young man with a head wound, and spent the entire time in the ER making comments about how the hospital was wasting resources on people like that. Dr. Webb had asked him to lower his voice. Morrow had stared at Webb for a long moment before complying. It was the kind of stare that was meant to communicate something without saying a word. Tonight he wasn't bringing in a suspect. Tonight he was there about his father. Gerald Morrow was 68 years old and had been admitted to Mercy General 2 days earlier with a chest infection that had gotten out of control. He had a history of COPD, a stubborn refusal to take his medication consistently, and a son who believed that the badge on his chest entitled him to answers that bypassed standard procedure. Claire wasn't Gerald's primary nurse. She was covering because the nurse assigned to him had gone on break and asked Claire to check in. She didn't know any of that mattered until she was standing at Gerald's bedside, reviewing his chart, and the door behind her opened hard enough to hit the wall. "Who are you?" Morrow said. Claire turned. "I'm Nurse Donnelly. I'm covering for—" "Where's the other one? The one who was here before?" "She's on her break. I'm covering her patients. Your father is stable. His vitals are—" "I didn't ask you about his vitals." Morrow stepped fully into the room. "I asked why there's a different nurse in here and why nobody told me." Claire kept her voice even. "I understand you're concerned. Your father's care hasn't been interrupted. His antibiotic drip is on schedule. His oxygen levels are—" "He told me he asked for pain medication an hour ago and nobody brought it." Claire looked at the chart. "According to this, he received a dose at—" "I don't care what the chart says. I care what my father told me. Are you calling him a liar?" Gerald Morrow, from the bed, made a weak gesture with his hand. "Dale, take it easy. She's just doing her job." "Stay out of this, Dad." Something cold moved through Claire's chest. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. She had dealt with difficult family members before. It was part of the work. But there was something different about the way this man occupied the room. Like he wasn't just upset, like he was looking for something to be angry about. "Officer Morrow," she said, keeping her tone professional and direct. "I am going to review his medication log and speak with the charge nurse. If there was a delay in his pain management, we will address it immediately. That is my commitment to you." "Your commitment." He repeated the words like they tasted bad. "Lady, I've been watching you people run this place into the ground for 2 days. My father can barely breathe. He can't get a straight answer from anyone. And now you're standing here telling me about your commitment?" "Sir, I understand." "No, you don't understand, because you're not the one watching his father suffer." And that was when Claire made the decision that would, within 30 minutes, change the trajectory of her entire night. She said, quietly but clearly, "I'd like to ask you to lower your voice. There are other patients in this unit." The room went still. Morrow looked at her, really looked at her, like he was recalibrating. "What did you say to me?" "I said, please lower your voice. You are in a hospital. Other people are trying to rest." From the bed, Gerald closed his eyes. Morrow took a single step toward her, and something about the way he moved, the deliberateness of it, the weight, made the hair on Claire's arms stand up. "Let me tell you something," he said very quietly now. "I have been a police officer in this county for 19 years. I know every administrator in this building. I know your hospital's board members, and I know how to make a complaint that sticks. So I would strongly suggest that you stop talking to me like I'm one of your patients and start talking to me like I'm someone you should be taking seriously." Claire did not move, did not flinch. "I take everyone seriously," she said, "including the patient in the next room who is trying to sleep. Now, if you'll give me a few minutes, I will review the medication log and come back with answers." She turned to leave. That was when it happened. His hand came out fast, faster than she expected from a man his size. And it didn't grab her arm. It didn't grab her shoulder. His fingers wrapped around the side of her neck. Not quite a full choke, but close enough. And he shoved her back against the supply cabinet, hard enough that a tray of instruments clattered to the floor. "Don't you walk away from me." The sound of the tray hitting the floor cut through the hallway noise like a gunshot. Claire's back hit the cabinet, Her breath left her body. Her hands came up instinctively, not to fight, but to brace. And for a single, suspended second, she looked into Dale Morrow's face and saw something there that she would spend a long time trying to describe. It wasn't rage. It was something colder than that, something calculated underneath the anger. And then the moment broke. An orderly appeared in the doorway, then a second nurse, then another drawn by the sound. They froze in the threshold, staring at the tableau. A police officer, his hand on a nurse's neck, pressing her against a cabinet in a room with a recovering patient watching from the bed. Morrow stepped back, just like that, as if it had never happened. He straightened his jacket, ran one hand along the front of his uniform, and said, to no one in particular, "She slipped. I caught her." Nobody in that doorway said a word, not because they believed him, but because they were afraid. Claire stood against the cabinet, breathing carefully, her hand moving to her throat without her consciously deciding to do it. She looked at the faces in the doorway. She looked at the orderly she had worked alongside for 4 years. She looked at the nurse she had trained herself 2 years ago, fresh out of school. None of them moved. None of them spoke. And Claire understood, with devastating clarity, exactly what she was facing. Morrow looked at her one more time. "I'll be back in the morning to speak with the department head," he said. His voice was completely calm now, completely controlled. "I'd suggest you have a good explanation for why my father didn't get his medication on time." He walked out. The orderly, his name was Kevin, and he had 3 kids and a mortgage, stepped aside to let him pass. The other nurse, her name was Brianna, and she had 2 years left on her student loans, looked at the floor. And Claire stood alone in a hospital room, listening to the footsteps of the man who had just put his hands on her neck fade down the corridor. Gerald Morrow's voice came from the bed. It was thin and ashamed. "I'm sorry," the old man said. "He's always been like this. I'm so sorry." Claire looked at him, and despite everything, despite the ache in her neck and the adrenaline burning through her veins and the quiet, suffocating horror of what had just happened, she said, "It's not your fault, Mr. Morrow. Let me check on that medication for you." Because she was a nurse. And that was what nurses did. But something had shifted inside her. Something quiet and certain and utterly without doubt. She was not going to let this go. She walked to the nursing station with careful, deliberate steps, and she picked up the incident report form. Her hands weren't shaking. She noticed that, and it surprised her. She had expected to be shaking. Instead, she felt something that, if she had to name it, she would have called resolve. Charge nurse Patricia Hollis was at the station, 50s, 25 years at Mercy General. She looked up when she saw Claire with the form in her hand, and something moved behind her eyes. "Claire, he put his hands on my neck, Patricia." Patricia glanced down the hallway. "I know, Kevin told me." "Then you know I need to file this." Another glance, longer this time. "That's Officer Morrow's son. I know whose son he is." "Claire," Patricia's voice dropped lower, "Dale Morrow has friends on this hospital's board. He plays golf with the chief of staff. Last year, he filed a complaint against one of our residents, Dr. Adeyemi, and that young man almost lost his position because of it. Over nothing, over a misunderstanding in a waiting room." "This wasn't a misunderstanding," Claire said. "I know that." "Patricia, he put his hand on my throat." The charge nurse looked at the form, then at Claire. Then she did something that told Claire everything she needed to know about the situation she was standing in. Patricia Hollis, 25-year veteran of that hospital, the woman who had trained Claire herself, reached out and slowly pushed the incident report form back across the counter toward Claire. "I can't tell you not to file it," she said. "That's your right. But I can tell you what's going to happen if you do." A beat of silence. "Tell me," Claire said. "He's going to say you were combative. He's going to say you raised your voice at him and that he was trying to calm you down. He's going to find the 2 or 3 people in that hallway who are too scared to contradict him, and he's going to build a story. And then his friends on the board are going to look at your file, and they're going to find the one time you were late submitting a report, or the one patient complaint from 3 years ago, and they are going to use it. And by the end of it, you are going to be the difficult nurse who assaulted an officer. Claire stared at the form. He assaulted me, she said. I know. In front of witnesses. Witnesses who are scared, Claire. Another silence, longer. I know, Patricia said again, and her voice this time carried something that wasn't just professional caution. It carried the weight of a woman who had watched this happen before, who maybe had her own story, who had looked at her own form on her own terrible night and made a different calculation. Claire picked up the pen. I'm filing it, she said. Patricia nodded once. And in that nod was not approval or disapproval, just acknowledgement. The kind of acknowledgement that meant, I see you, and I know what this costs. Claire filled out the form. She was precise. She was factual. She did not use words like terrifying or violent. She wrote, Officer Dale Morrow placed his hand on my neck and pushed me into the supply cabinet with sufficient force to cause instruments to fall. I was left with soreness in my neck and difficulty turning my head. Several staff members were present. She signed it. She handed it to Patricia, and then she went back to work. She did not know, in that moment, that Officer Dale Morrow had already made a phone call from the parking garage. That within the hour, a member of the hospital's administration team would receive a message suggesting that one of their night shift nurses had been emotionally unstable and aggressive during a routine family inquiry. That by midnight, the incident report she had just filed would be reviewed by someone in the administration building who had Dale Morrow's number in his contacts list. She did not know any of that. What she knew was the weight of the pen in her hand and the ache in her neck and the faces of the people in that doorway who had looked away. She went back to her patients. She completed her rounds. She changed a dressing, answered a call light, talked a frightened woman through a panic attack at 2 a.m. with the patience of someone who had done it 100 times and never made it feel like a routine. At 3:15 a.m., she sat down for the first time in 6 hours. She held a cold cup of coffee and stared at the wall. Brianna, the younger nurse, appeared beside her, sat down without asking, didn't say anything for a full minute. Then, I should have said something. In that room, I should have said something. Claire looked at her. Why didn't you? She asked. She wasn't accusatory. She genuinely wanted to know. Brianna's hands wrapped around her own cup. Because I have student loans, and a lease I can't afford to break, and my mom is on my insurance. She paused. That sounds terrible. It sounds human, Claire said. Claire, he had his hand on your... I know. He could have... I know. Are you okay? Claire considered the question. Not the way you consider a social nicety, but the way you consider an actual question that deserves an actual answer. No, she said, but I will be. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. Because what she meant was something larger than tonight, something that had been building for longer than one shift. What she meant was that she had spent 11 years being the backbone that other people leaned on, and tonight she had found out exactly how strong that backbone really was. She meant that Dale Morrow had made a mistake when he put his hands on her. Not because she was going to fight him, but because she was going to be impossible to silence. By the time her shift ended at 7 a.m, the sun was coming up over Charleston. Claire signed out, collected her bag, and walked toward the elevator. She was almost there when the charge nurse from the day shift stopped her. Someone she barely knew, a woman named Rosa, middle-aged, steady-eyed. Rosa handed her a folded piece of paper. Someone left this at the station for you, Rosa said. Her voice was careful in a way that said the paper meant something. Claire unfolded it. It was a photocopy of a hospital parking garage security log, dated 3 weeks earlier, with a specific timestamp circled in red ink. And written in small, careful handwriting at the bottom of the page were 5 words. You are not the first. Claire stood in the elevator with the paper in her hand and the doors closing around her, and she felt the shift happen. Not fear, not anger, though both were there. What she felt was something that the best nurses always have when they finally see the full picture of what they're dealing with. Clarity. She had filed a report. She had documented the truth. She had witnesses, even if those witnesses were scared. And now someone inside that building had just told her, silently, carefully, at great personal risk, that Dale Morrow had done this before. The elevator doors opened. The lobby was already filling with the morning rush of people coming and going, and Claire walked through it with the paper folded against her chest, and she thought about all of it. The hand on her neck, the faces in the doorway, the form she had signed, the 5 words on the paper, and she made a decision that she would not fully understand the consequences of until a man in a Navy uniform walked through the doors of her emergency room and changed everything. She was going to find every single one of them, every person who had been here before, every person who had looked away, every person who had been handed the form and told what would happen if they filed it. She was going to find them, and she was going to make sure that this time, not a single one of them was alone. She walked out of Mercy General at 7:14 in the morning with a folded piece of paper against her chest and 5 words burned into her memory. You are not the first. The sun was already warm on her face, the kind of warmth that felt almost offensive after a night like that. And Claire Donnelly stood on the sidewalk outside the hospital entrance and did something she hadn't allowed herself to do once during the entire 12-hour shift. She stopped, she breathed, and she let herself feel exactly how much her neck hurt. It wasn't severe. It wasn't the kind of pain that sent you to the ER. It was the dull, persistent ache of something that had been grabbed and shoved. The kind of pain that reminded you, every time you turned your head, that someone had decided your body was something they could put their hands on without consequence. She got in her car. She sat there for 4 minutes without starting the engine. Then she took out her phone and did something careful and deliberate. She opened her voice memo app and she recorded everything. Every detail she could remember, the time, the room number, the exact words Morrow had said before he grabbed her, the sound of the instruments hitting the floor, the faces in the doorway, what Patricia had said at the nursing station. Every single word spoken clearly and calmly into the microphone because she understood something that years of nursing had taught her about documentation. Memory fades, details blur, but a recording made within hours of an event, with the adrenaline still in your voice, is something that holds up. She saved the file, sent a copy to her personal email, then she started the car and drove. She didn't go home right away. She drove to her sister's house. Margaret was 3 years older, a high school history teacher, and the kind of woman who made coffee before she asked questions. When she opened the door and saw Claire's face, she did exactly that. She said nothing, stepped aside, walked straight to the kitchen, and had 2 mugs on the table before Claire had even sat down. Tell me, Margaret said, and Claire told her. All of it. The room, the cabinet, the hand on her neck, the silence in the doorway, the form she'd filed, the papers someone had slipped to her at the end of the shift. Margaret listened without interrupting. That was her gift, the ability to hold space for a story without rushing it toward a conclusion. When Claire finished, her sister was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Do you still have the paper?" "Yes." "Show me." Claire laid it on the table between them. The parking garage security log, the circled timestamp, the 5 words in small, careful handwriting at the bottom. Margaret studied it. Someone inside that hospital knows what he did, and they're scared enough that they couldn't say it out loud, but brave enough that they couldn't stay silent either. That's what I thought. Claire, Margaret looked up. This man has connections. You said it yourself. Board members, the chief of staff. He's already made a phone call tonight, I guarantee it. I know. So what are you going to do? Claire wrapped both hands around her mug. I'm going to find whoever wrote this note, and I'm going to find out how many times he's done this before. Margaret held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. Okay, then we're going to need a lawyer. That was 9:47 in the morning. By noon, everything had already started to move, and not in the direction Claire had expected. She was back home, trying to sleep, when her phone rang. The number was one she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. Is this Claire Donnelly? A woman's voice, professional, measured. Yes. My name is Sandra Okafor. I'm an attorney. I specialize in healthcare whistleblower cases and law enforcement misconduct. I received a call this morning from someone who told me I needed to reach you today. I can't tell you who that person is, but I can tell you they were very specific about what happened to you last night. Claire sat up slowly. Who called you? I can't share that. What I can tell you is that what was described to me is not the first complaint I've heard about Officer Dale Morrow. It is, however, the first one where the victim filed a report on the same night. That matters, Miss Donnelly. That matters enormously. A beat of silence. How many complaints? Claire asked. Another pause, carefully chosen. Enough that when your call came in, I cleared my afternoon. That was the first major turn. Not a dramatic one, not a loud one, just the quiet, devastating realization that the thing she had been telling herself was personal, was targeted specifically at her, was in fact part of a pattern. A long, documented, deliberately buried pattern. She met Sandra Okafor at her office at 2 in the afternoon. Sandra was in her late 40s, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses, a desk with 4 different stacks of folders that all looked like they contained exactly the kind of information that powerful people preferred didn't exist. She shook Claire's hand and immediately got down to it. Tell me everything, she said. Don't edit, don't soften it. Tell me exactly what happened, in the order it happened. Claire told her. Sandra took notes. When Claire finished, Sandra set down her pen and looked at her directly. The physical contact is criminal assault, she said. Under South Carolina law, there is no version of what you've described that isn't criminal assault. The "she slipped, I caught her" story is not going to hold up against multiple witnesses, a filed incident report made within hours of the incident, a voice memo, and a documented neck injury. The witnesses are scared, Claire said. They're scared right now. Fear has a shelf life, Ms. Donnelly, especially realize they're not standing alone. Sandra leaned forward slightly. Here's what I need you to understand. Morrow has already moved. By this morning, someone from hospital administration had flagged your incident report for review. They're calling it a routine administrative process. It is not routine. They're trying to get ahead of this. Claire felt the cold move through her chest again. How do you know that? Because the person who called me this morning works in hospital administration. Sandra let that land. And they are not on Morrow's side. For a moment, Claire couldn't speak. Someone inside the administration building, someone who had seen the flag go on her report and immediately reached out for help. Someone who had taken a risk just as real as the one the person who left the parking log had taken. She wasn't as alone as she'd felt in that cabinet. What do we do? She said. First, Sandra said, you go to urgent care today and get your neck examined and documented. Not because you necessarily need treatment, but because a medical record created within 24 hours of the assault is evidence that can't be argued away later. Then you go home, you don't contact anyone from the hospital, and you don't respond to any calls from administration or HR. Everything goes through me from this point. And then, Sandra said, we find out exactly how many people Dale Morrow has done this to. By 3:15 that afternoon, Claire was sitting in an urgent care waiting room with an ice pack against the side of her neck, filling out intake forms and thinking about something Sandra had said. Fear has a shelf life. She was turning that phrase over in her mind when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. No greeting, no signature, just a name and a 3-digit room number. Room 114. Ask for Marcus. She stared at the screen. Marcus. The only Marcus she knew at Mercy General was Dr. Marcus Webb, the attending physician who had nodded at her at the start of last night's shift, with that quiet look that said, "I'm glad you're here." She texted Sandra immediately. Sandra responded within 60 seconds. "Don't go alone. I'll send someone with you." At 5:40 that evening, Claire sat in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the hospital, across from a man she had worked alongside for 3 years and never once had a real conversation with. Dr. Marcus Webb was in street clothes, jeans and a gray jacket, and he looked like someone who had not slept. His hands were around a coffee cup he hadn't touched. "I heard you filed the report," he said. "I did. I heard it was flagged this morning." "I know." He looked at the table, then back at her. "I owe you an apology." She waited. 8 months ago, he said, Morrow came in about a different family member, his uncle. He was aggressive with one of the nurses, a young woman, first year out of school. He didn't touch her the way he touched you, but he cornered her in a supply room and said things to her that... He stopped, started again. "She came to me. She wanted to report it, and I told her that it might be better to let it go." The words sat between them like a stone on the table. "You told her to let it go," Claire said. "I was wrong." He said it without deflection, without excuse, just flatly and completely. "I was wrong, and she left the hospital 4 months later, and I don't know where she is now, and I have thought about that conversation every single day since you walked out of Gerald Morrow's room last night." Claire was quiet for a moment. "What's her name?" "Amy Tran." He reached into his jacket pocket and set a folded piece of paper on the table. "Her last known contact information. I can't promise she'll talk to you, but she deserves to know that someone finally did what she couldn't." Claire looked at the paper. Didn't touch it yet. "Marcus," she said carefully, "will you give a statement about what she told you? About what you witnessed last night when you heard the instruments fall?" He was quiet for a long time. "I was down the hall," he said. "I heard the crash. I didn't go in." "Why?" Another long pause. "Because I already knew whose father was in that room, and I made a calculation." He looked ashamed. "The same calculation Patricia made. The same one Kevin made. The same one everyone makes when it's someone with that much power in a building you need to keep working in." "And now?" Claire said. He looked at her steadily. "Now I'm sitting across from the only person in that building last night who didn't make that calculation, and I'm trying to figure out if it's too late to be on the right side of this." Claire picked up the paper with Amy Tran's name on it, folded it, put it in her pocket. "It's not too late," she said, "but I need you to mean it." "I mean it." "Then call Sandra Okafor tonight. Tell her exactly what you just told me. Don't soften it. Don't make yourself look better. Just tell her what happened." He nodded, picked up his coffee, and for the first time since she'd sat down, took a sip. She was almost at the door when he said, "Claire." She turned. "Be careful. Morrow knows you filed the report. Word travels fast in a building like that, and men like him, when they start to feel cornered, they don't get quieter." She felt the weight of that land in her chest. "I know," she said. She walked out. It was 7:20 in the evening. She had been awake for over 30 hours. Her neck ached, her eyes burned, and the list of people who knew what Dale Morrow was capable of had just grown by one more. She drove home with Amy Tran's name folded in her pocket, and Marcus Webb's voice in her head, and Sandra Okafor's words looping underneath everything else. Fear has a shelf life. She wondered how long Morrow thought his would last. She got her answer sooner than she expected. At 8:53, her front doorbell rang. She almost didn't answer, looked through the peephole first, saw a woman she didn't recognize, maybe late 30s, dark hair pulled back, standing on the porch with her arms crossed against the evening chill, and the expression of someone who had been standing outside working up the courage to ring a doorbell for longer than she wanted to admit. Claire opened the door. The woman looked at her, then at the fading bruise beginning to show along the side of Claire's neck. "I saw that this morning," the woman said, "in the hallway, right after it happened, before you even knew the instruments had fallen." Claire stared at her. "I don't recognize you." "You wouldn't. I'm not hospital staff. I was there visiting my mother. Room 116, she paused. "I saw everything." The word hit Claire somewhere underneath her ribs. Everything. "I recorded it," the woman said. She held up her phone. "On this, I was standing in the hallway. He didn't see me. I had my phone out because I was about to call my sister, and when I heard him raise his voice, something, I don't know why, but something told me to just keep recording." Claire could not speak for a full 3 seconds. "Who are you?" she finally managed. "My name is Denise Fowler." She held out the phone. On the screen was a video file, a timestamp, 9:41 in the evening. "I went home this morning and I looked you up. It took me a while to find your name because I only knew your first name from your badge, but I found a community nursing award you won 2 years ago. Your name was in the article." She met Claire's eyes. "I don't know what you're planning to do, but whatever it is, you have me. You have what's on this phone, and I am not afraid of Dale Morrow." Claire looked at the phone in Denise Fowler's hand, a complete recording, from a civilian who had no stake in the hospital, no employment to protect, no board member's number in her contact list. A witness the system could not touch. She stepped back from the door. "Please come in," she said. "I need to call my attorney." Denise Fowler walked through the door, and something that had been coiling in Claire's chest all day, the tight, suffocating feeling of being isolated and outmatched and systematically dismissed, began for the first time to loosen. Sandra's voice on the phone was the steadiest thing Claire had heard all day. A civilian video, full contact, timed and on a personal device with no hospital affiliation. A brief silence. "Ms. Donnelly, I want you to listen to me carefully. What you just described changes the architecture of this case completely. With that recording, we are no longer talking about one nurse's word against a 19-year veteran officer with board connections. We are talking about documentary evidence of criminal assault, the kind that prosecutors can take to a grand jury without needing a single witness from inside that hospital to testify." "What does that mean for tomorrow?" Claire asked. "It means," Sandra said, "that tomorrow morning I am calling the Charleston County District Attorney's Office, and it means that Dale Morrow's clock just started." Claire sat with Denise Fowler in her kitchen for almost 2 hours that night. Denise transferred the video to Sandra's secure server. She gave a written account of what she saw. She signed it. She was calm and specific, and she didn't hesitate once. At one point, Claire asked her, "Why? You don't know me. You have nothing to do with this." Denise looked at her with an expression that was completely simple and completely serious. "I'm a black woman in my late 30s in the American South," she said, "and I watched a man in a police uniform put his hand around a woman's throat in a public building in front of a room full of people who said nothing." A pause. "If I stayed quiet about that, I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror. And I've spent enough of my life looking away from things I should have looked at." Claire held that for a moment. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Denise said. "Thank me when it's done." After Denise left, Claire sat alone at her kitchen table. The house was quiet. Her neck ached. The folded paper with Amy Tran's name was on the table in front of her. On her phone, a text from Sandra. "Call me when you wake up. We move tomorrow." She thought about Morrow, about the way he had straightened his jacket after shoving her into the cabinet, the smoothness of it, the practiced ease, like a man who had done something like that before and fully expected to walk away from it the same way he always had. She thought about Amy Tran, who hadn't had a Denise Fowler, who hadn't had a Sandra Okafor clearing her afternoon, who had gone to Marcus Webb and been told, quietly and not without guilt, to let it go, and who had left the hospital 4 months later and hadn't been heard from since. Claire picked up her phone. She opened a new text message to the unknown number that had sent her Marcus Webb's room number. She typed a single line. "I have what we need. Tell me who else I should talk to." She sent it. She sat back. She didn't know, in that quiet kitchen, that Amy Tran was going to call her within 14 hours. That Marcus Webb was already on the phone with Sandra Okafor. That the administrator who had called Sandra that morning was preparing to photocopy documents that had never been meant to leave the building. And she didn't know that Dale Morrow, at that exact moment, was in the parking lot of a bar 2 miles from the hospital, on a phone call with someone on the hospital board, saying the words that men who have something to hide always say when the walls begin to close. "It needs to go away," Morrow said. "I don't care how. It just needs to go away." What no one on either side of that night knew yet was that there was one more person about to enter this story. A person who had not been inside Mercy General, who had no connection to the hospital, or to Morrow, or to the board, or to Sandra Okafor. A person who, the very next morning, would walk through the emergency room doors in a Navy dress uniform and change the direction of everything. Not because he was looking for a fight, but because he happened to be exactly where he was supposed to be, and because he saw something in Claire Donnelly's face that every military officer is trained, at the deepest level of their instinct, to recognize. A person in danger. A person who needed someone to step forward. A person who was, despite everything she had built in the last 24 hours, still standing at the edge of something that could go either way. Toward justice, or toward the long, quiet erasure that powerful men had been perfecting for years. He walked in at 8:17 the next morning, and Dale Morrow had no idea he was coming. He walked through the emergency room doors at 8:17 in the morning, and the first thing Rear Admiral James Collier did was nothing dramatic. He didn't announce himself. He didn't look for attention. He simply walked to the front desk, gave his name quietly, and said he was there to visit a former colleague who had been admitted the previous evening with a cardiac episode. The woman at the desk looked up at the uniform, at the silver stars, at the bearing of a man who had spent 31 years in the United States Navy, and she said, "Of course, sir," and gave him the room number without a single question. That was 8:19. Claire was already on shift. She hadn't planned to come in. Sandra had told her to rest, to stay home, to let the legal process begin its work. But Amy Tran had called at 6:40 that morning, and what Amy said in that phone call had done something to Claire that rest couldn't fix. It had made staying home feel impossible. Amy Tran's voice on the phone was quiet and controlled, in the way that voices get when someone has spent a long time learning to keep themselves together by sheer discipline. She was 29. She was currently working at a small clinic in Columbia, an hour and a half from Charleston. She had left Mercy General 14 months ago, not 4, which meant Marcus Webb had been wrong about the timeline, or had softened it in the retelling to himself. "He didn't just corner me," Amy said. "He grabbed my wrist, hard enough to leave a mark. And when I told Marcus, when I went to Dr. Webb the next day and showed him the bruise, he looked at it, and he looked at me, and he said, 'Amy, this man has real influence here. I don't want to see you get hurt worse by pushing something you can't win.'" She paused. "I filed internally anyway. The report was reviewed. I was told the matter had been looked into and found to be a misunderstanding. 3 weeks later, my shift schedule was cut. 2 weeks after that, I was passed over for a full-time position I had already been verbally offered. And 1 month after that, I resigned." Claire held the phone against her ear and said nothing for a moment. "Amy, would you be willing to give a formal statement to my attorney?" A long pause, long enough that Claire didn't try to fill it. "Yes," Amy finally said. "I've been waiting 14 months for someone to ask me that." So Claire had called Sandra at 7 in the morning. Sandra had said, "Get her information and send it to me. Then please, Claire, go back to sleep. And Claire had said, I'm going into work. And Sandra had sighed in the way that lawyers sigh when they know their clients well enough to understand that arguing is pointless. So that was why Claire was in the ER at 8:19 when Rear Admiral James Collier walked past the front desk with a room number in his hand. She didn't notice him at first. The morning shift was already moving fast. 2 overnight admissions from the ER needed transfer coordination. A family in the waiting room was escalating over discharge paperwork. And somewhere in the back of her mind, underneath all of it, was the awareness that Dale Morrow had told the board member he needed it to go away. That Sandra's call to the DA's office was happening this morning. That somewhere in the machinery of this thing she had set in motion, gears were turning that she couldn't see or control. She was at the nursing station pulling a chart when Brianna appeared at her elbow. Claire, Brianna's voice was low and careful. He's here. Claire looked up. Who? Morrow. Brianna's jaw was tight. He just walked through the main entrance. He's talking to someone from administration by the front desk. A man I've never seen before. Claire set the chart down slowly. She didn't turn around immediately. She breathed. She let herself think for exactly 3 seconds, which was all she allowed herself. Then she turned. Dale Morrow was standing near the main entrance in plain clothes. No uniform. That was the first thing she clocked. He was in dark jeans and a jacket, which meant he was here unofficially, which meant this visit wasn't a personal wellness check on his father. The man beside him was in a hospital administration lanyard. Mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of polish that came from years of donor dinners and board meetings. Claire didn't know his name, but she recognized the type. She had seen that type her entire career. Men who made decisions about patient care from carpeted offices and called it leadership. Morrow said something to the administration man, and the administration man nodded once and looked across the ER floor. Directly at Claire. The weight of that look was specific, not hostile. Worse than hostile, it was assessing. The kind of look that calculated odds and consequences and exit strategies. Brianna beside her made a small sound that wasn't quite a word. It's okay, Claire said. She meant it as reassurance. It came out as something closer to a vow. She picked up her phone and texted Sandra. Morrow here, administration escort, no uniform, sending now. Sandra's response came in 40 seconds. Do not engage. Go about your work. Do not let him isolate you. Stay in areas with other staff present at all times. I am already on the phone with the DA. Claire put the phone in her pocket. She picked up the chart. She went back to work. It was 8:34 when Admiral Collier stopped at the nursing station and asked for a nurse named Claire Donnelly. He didn't shout it. He simply stood at the desk and waited. And when Kevin the orderly looked up and said, "She's just around the corner," the Admiral said thank you and walked in the direction Kevin pointed. Claire was standing at a patient doorway, chart in hand, when she heard footsteps behind her that had a different rhythm than hospital footsteps. Purposeful, but unhurried. The sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going and felt no need to announce it. She turned. The silver stars caught the light. She had a half second to take in the uniform, the bearing, the age, mid-60s, gray at the temples, eyes that had the quality of still water that was very, very deep, before he stopped a respectful distance away and said, "Nurse Donnelly?" "Yes." "My name is James Collier. I'm here visiting Captain Ray Hendricks in room 212. I believe you're the nurse managing his care this morning." "I am," Claire said, and she started to say something about Captain Hendricks's condition, something professional and measured, when Admiral Collier did something that stopped her completely. He looked at her neck. Not a glance, a look. The kind that a man makes when he is trained to assess situations quickly and has already assessed this one before she noticed him doing it. "How long ago did that happen?" he said quietly. Claire's hand went to her neck involuntarily. I've been in enough situations in my career to recognize a hand mark when I see one. A pause. And I noticed when I came in, The man in plain clothes by the front entrance talking to administration. The way he looked at you when you turned around. Claire stared at him. You saw that, she said. I notice things, he said simply. 31 years in the Navy. It's habit. He held her gaze. Is there something happening in this hospital that I should be aware of? She almost said no. The professional instinct, the same one that had made Patricia Hollis slide the form back across the counter, rose up automatically. Don't involve civilians. Don't escalate. Don't make it bigger than it is. But this man was not a civilian. And something in the way he was looking at her, steady, direct, without any trace of the calculating assessment she had seen in the administration man's eyes, made the automatic response fail. Yes, she said. No, he said, but I know what a bruise like that means. And I know what a man like the one by that entrance looks like when he thinks he's already won. Something moved in his expression. Not anger, but a kind of long, deep practiced resolve. And I have spent my entire career making sure that kind of man is wrong. It was 8:41 in the morning. Claire said, "Make your call." He stepped away. He was on the phone for 7 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock while she stood at the nursing station, pretending to review a chart, and actually doing nothing except managing her own breathing. Morrow and the administration man had moved further into the ER corridor. They were talking to someone from HR now, a woman Claire recognized named Janet Foley, who had kind eyes and a reputation for doing what she was told. Whatever they were saying to Janet Foley was making Janet glance in Claire's direction every 30 seconds with an expression that looked like apology. At 8:48, Admiral Collier came back. I've spoken with my contact, he said. He's aware of your attorney, Sandra Okafor. He says she's already been in contact with the DA this morning, and the situation is being taken seriously at a level above the local precinct. He paused. He also told me something you should know. Dale Morrow filed a counter-complaint against you at 7:15 this morning with hospital administration. He's alleging that you were verbally abusive and that the physical contact last night was initiated by you. Claire heard the words. She felt them land. And then she felt something shift underneath them. Not collapse, but harden. He filed first, she said. Yes. He knew I would come in today. He wanted to be on record before I had a chance to respond. That appears to be the strategy, Collier said. He was watching her with that steady, assessing look. How are you holding up? The question was so direct and so genuine that it caught her off guard in a way that the threat hadn't. I'm angry, she said honestly, and I'm tired, and I am not going to let him do this. Collier was quiet for a moment. Then, I'd like to go with you, wherever you're going next in this building. I'm not here as a military officer in any official capacity. I'm here as a witness and as a person who can occupy space. Sometimes that's enough to change what someone thinks they can get away with. She looked at him. You'd do that. I'm already doing it, he said. At 9:02, Janet Foley walked across the ER floor toward Claire with the careful expression of someone delivering a message they wish they weren't delivering. Claire, I've been asked to let you know that there's a meeting in the HR conference room at 9:30. Administration would like to. Is this regarding the incident report I filed last night? Claire asked. Janet hesitated. There are some concerns that need to be addressed, yes. Is my attorney required to be present, or is this informal? Another hesitation. It's described as a preliminary discussion. Then I'll need to call my attorney before I attend. Claire kept her voice completely level. I'll let you know what she advises. Janet looked uncomfortable. Then she looked at Admiral Collier, standing quietly 2 feet to Claire's left, in full dress uniform, silver stars, posture that occupied the room in a way that had nothing to do with aggression and everything to do with a kind of absolute presence. Janet blinked. Of course, she said, and retreated. Claire texted Sandra immediately. Counter-complaint filed by Morrow, 7:15 a.m., HR meeting requested 9:30. Advise. Sandra's response was 30 seconds. Do not attend without me. Tell them your attorney is being contacted. I'll be there by 9:15. Also, the DA's office has opened a formal inquiry as of 8:55 a.m. Do not tell anyone inside that building yet. Claire read that last line twice. The DA's office. A formal inquiry. As of 8:55 in the morning, she looked up from her phone. Across the ER, she could see Morrow standing near the corridor, talking on his own phone now. His back was partially to her, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. The way his free hand kept moving, pressing against his thigh, releasing, pressing again. The physical vocabulary of a man who was performing calm and not quite pulling it off. He didn't know yet. About the DA, about Denise Fowler's video, about Amy Tran calling from Columbia at dawn. About any of it, he thought he was still winning. The thought didn't bring her satisfaction. What it brought her was something more sober than that, a recognition of the exact moment in a situation when the balance tips, when it stops being the story one person is telling and becomes something larger than any single person's version of events. At 9:14, Sandra Okafor walked through the main entrance of Mercy General wearing a charcoal blazer and carrying a briefcase with the calm purpose of someone who had done this many times and never once broken a sweat doing it. She found Claire at the nursing station, shook her hand, and then turned to Admiral Collier with a look of open assessment. Sandra Okafor, she said, extending her hand. James Collier, he said, shaking it. Retired. I'm here in a personal capacity. Sandra looked at Claire. Claire gave her the briefest nod that meant, I'll explain later. I trust him. Sandra turned back to Collier. Are you willing to provide a written statement about what you observed this morning? Specifically, the behavior and positioning of the individual in plain clothes near the front entrance? Absolutely, he said. Sandra almost smiled. Almost. Let's go have a meeting with HR. They walked into the HR conference room at 9:22. Janet Foley was there. The silver-haired administration man, whose name Claire now knew from Sandra, was Vice President of Operations David Harrell, was there. And seated at the far end of the table, in the chair that communicated both distance and authority, was Dale Morrow. He looked at Claire when she walked in, then at Sandra, then at the man in the Navy uniform behind them. And for the first time since Claire had known of his existence, something moved across Dale Morrow's face that wasn't confidence. It was brief, gone in a second, but it was there. Sandra set her briefcase on the table and opened it without sitting down. She placed 3 documents on the surface and said, without preamble, before this meeting begins, I want to be transparent about several things. My client filed a formal incident report within hours of the assault last night. That report is already with the Charleston County DA's office, which opened a formal inquiry this morning at 8:55 a.m. She let that land. Additionally, there is video documentation of the assault, captured by a civilian witness with no hospital affiliation. That documentation has been preserved and provided to law enforcement. And there are currently 2 additional witnesses prepared to give statements corroborating a pattern of behavior by Officer Morrow inside this facility. The room was absolutely silent. David Harrell's face had gone the color of old wax. Janet Foley had stopped breathing. Morrow stared at Sandra for a long, unblinking moment. Then he looked at Claire. And in that look, in the specific, layered quality of it, Claire saw the calculation happening in real time, the reassessment, the measurement of new odds. I don't know what she told you, Morrow said. His voice was controlled, professional. But I have 19 years. Mr. Morrow, Sandra said without raising her voice, I'd strongly suggest that anything further you'd like to say, you say to your own attorney, because this meeting is no longer a preliminary discussion. It is now part of a formal record. She looked at Harrell. Mr. Harrell, I'd also like to discuss the counter-complaint filed against my client at 7:15 this morning. Given the timeline of events and the evidence currently in the possession of the DA's office, I'm confident you understand the position the hospital is now in if it continues to process that counter-complaint. Harold opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I think, he said carefully, that we should all take a moment to... My client doesn't have a moment, Sandra said. She has been assaulted, counter-complained against, and summoned to a meeting without adequate notice or representation. She has been at work since before 8 this morning because she is a professional who takes her responsibilities seriously, even when the institution she works for is failing to take its responsibilities equally seriously. She picked up one of the documents and slid it across the table. This is a formal request on behalf of my client that the counter-complaint filed this morning be withdrawn immediately. And this, she slid the second document, is a preservation notice requiring Mercy General to retain all security footage, access logs, medication records, incident reports, and communication records from the past 18 months related to Officer Morrow's presence in this facility. Destroying or altering any of those records now that this notice has been served would constitute obstruction. Another silence, a different kind this time, the kind that comes when a room full of people realizes that the story they thought they were in has been replaced by a different, much more serious one. Morrow pushed back from the table. I'm done here, he said. That's your right, Sandra said. Your attorney will be hearing from the DA's office today. He walked toward the door, and as he passed Admiral Collier, who had stood quietly against the wall the entire time, who had said nothing, who had simply been present with the full weight of 31 years and silver stars in a bearing that could silence a room without a single word, Morrow slowed. He looked at Collier. Something passed between them that wasn't words. A recognition, maybe, of what the other represented, of what was at stake. Then Morrow walked out. The door closed. Sandra looked at Harold. The counter-complaint, she said. Harold was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, It will be withdrawn. Sandra nodded once. Thank you. We'll need that in writing by noon. Claire sat in that conference room after Sandra and Harold and Janet Foley had all stepped out to handle various things, and Admiral Collier sat across from her, and neither of them spoke for almost a full minute. Then he said, You did well in there. Sandra did well, Claire said. Sandra was excellent, he agreed, but you sat in a room with a man who put his hand on your throat, and you didn't flinch. She looked at the table. I was flinching on the inside. Most people are, he said. The ones who aren't are usually the ones you have to worry about. He paused. In my experience, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you decide to do while the fear is still present. She looked up at him. Why are you really here? Not Captain Hendricks. Why are you in this city, in this hospital, on this particular morning? He considered the question with the same directness she'd come to expect from him. Captain Hendricks is a real patient and a real friend, and I am genuinely here to see him, he said. But I've also been in contact for the past 3 weeks with a federal healthcare oversight board that has been building a case against practices in several South Carolina hospitals. Not Mercy General specifically, but adjacent institutions. And when you describe what's been happening here, when you told me about the incident reports that disappeared, about the nurse who was pushed out, about the administrator who is quietly providing documents, I recognized a pattern. Claire stared at him. You recognized a pattern. A very specific one, he said, the kind that doesn't stop with one police officer who knows board members, the kind that goes deeper. He held her gaze. Ms. Donnelly, the person who's been communicating with your attorney from inside administration. Do you know their name? She shook her head. I might, he said quietly, and if I'm right about who it is, what they know goes significantly further than Dale Morrow. The words landed in the quiet room like a stone into still water. Everything she thought she understood about the shape of this thing shifted. She heard Sandra's words from the day before echo somewhere in the back of her skull. What started as one whistleblower's claim, and she heard, underneath it, something she hadn't fully let herself think until this moment. What if Dale Morrow wasn't the architect of this? What if he was just the most visible part of something that went much further into the walls of this hospital than anyone had yet said out loud? Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked down. A text from an unknown number, different from the one that had sent her Marcus Webb's room number, a number she had never seen before. 4 words. They know about the video. Her breath stopped for exactly 1 second. Then she picked up the phone and called Sandra. Sandra picked up on the first ring. They know about the video, Claire said. She kept her voice low and steady, but underneath it something was moving fast. I just got a text. Unknown number. 4 words. They know about the video. A beat of silence on Sandra's end. Then, where are you right now? Conference room, still inside the hospital. Is Admiral Collier with you? Yes. Good. Don't move. I'm 2 minutes away. I stepped into the hallway. Claire could hear Sandra's heels on tile, moving fast. Claire, listen to me carefully. The video is on my secure server. Denise Fowler's original copy is on her personal device. Those are the only 2 places it exists. For someone inside this situation to know about it, they either had access to communications between me and Denise, or someone Denise told is connected to Morrow's network. The cold that moved through Claire's chest was sharper this time. Denise wouldn't. No, I don't think she did either, which means someone is monitoring communications. Possibly yours, possibly mine. Another pause. This just became a significantly more serious situation than a single assault case. She came back through the conference room door 30 seconds later, phone still at her ear, ending her own call. She looked at Admiral Collier. How solid is your federal contact? Completely, he said. I need you to call him again, right now. Tell him we have a potential surveillance issue and that the integrity of evidence in an active DA inquiry may be compromised. She set her briefcase on the table and opened it with quick, efficient movements. And I need to know who sent that text. Claire looked at the unknown number again. Different from the one that had led her to Marcus Webb. Different from the one Denise had used. A completely new entry point into this story from someone she had not yet identified. She typed back a single word. Who are you? The response came in 11 seconds. Someone who made a mistake they can't unmake. Meet me. Not here. Noon. The coffee shop on Rutledge. Come alone. She showed the screen to Sandra. Sandra read it. Read it again. You're not going alone. They said, I know what they said. You're not going alone. She looked at Collier. How visible are you in this city? Moderately, he said. I've been to Charleston for medical conferences. Some people in administration circles would recognize me. Then you can't sit with her. Sandra thought for exactly 3 seconds. I'll be in the coffee shop before she arrives. Different table. If this contact sees a lawyer, they'll run. But if they see a woman alone with a coffee and a book, she looked at Claire. I need you to wear something different. Not scrubs, something civilian. Can you do that? I have clothes in my locker. Go change. Be at that coffee shop at 11:50. Sit by the window. Order something. Look like you've been there a while. Collier said, and if whoever sends that text is connected to Morrow's network, if it's a setup to get her somewhere isolated, then I'll be 8 feet away, Sandra said, and you'll be outside. She looked at him with the frank directness that Claire had come to understand was simply how Sandra operated. Unless you have a better idea. He didn't. It was 9:51 in the morning. By 10:30, the counter-complaint against Claire had been formally withdrawn. David Harrell delivered the written confirmation himself to Sandra in the hallway outside the conference room, with the expression of a man who had spent the morning recalculating every decision he'd made in the last 6 months and was not happy with the math. He handed Sandra the document, He did not make eye contact with Claire. He said, "We hope this resolves the immediate administrative concern." And Sandra said, "It's a start." And Harold walked away with his shoulders pulled in, like he was trying to take up less space. Sandra handed Claire the document. "Keep this." Claire looked at it. The formal withdrawal of a complaint designed to preemptively destroy her credibility. On paper, signed, time-stamped 10:22 a.m. "This is the first thing they've given us voluntarily," Claire said. "It won't be the last," Sandra said. "Once institutions start giving ground, they tend to keep going. The instinct shifts from protecting the aggressor to protecting themselves." She snapped her briefcase closed. "Go change. I'll see you at the coffee shop." Claire went to her locker. She changed into jeans and a dark blouse she kept for post-shift days when she ran errands before going home. She stood at the small mirror inside the locker door and looked at the bruise along the side of her neck. In natural light, it was unmistakable. Deep purple at the center, fading to green at the edges. The specific shape of something that had been gripped rather than hit. She pulled her collar up as far as it would go. It didn't fully cover it. Nothing fully covered it. She thought briefly about her mother. Her mother had been a nurse too, 40 years. She had told Claire once, sitting at the kitchen table after a particularly brutal shift, "The hardest part of this work isn't the patients. The patients are why you stay. The hardest part is the institution. Institutions will always protect themselves first. You have to decide if you can live with that and keep going." Claire had said at 23, "I can live with it." Now, at 38, she understood what her mother had actually been asking. Not whether she could tolerate it, whether she could survive it without becoming something smaller. She closed the locker. She had her answer. She arrived at the coffee shop on Rutledge at 11:47, ordered a coffee she didn't need, sat by the window, watched the street. Sandra was already there, at a corner table, reading a document with the focused attention of someone who was completely absorbed in their work and not surveilling the room. She didn't look up when Claire came in, didn't acknowledge her. Perfect. At 12:03, a woman walked through the door. She was mid-40s. Professional clothes, the kind that said hospital administration without saying it explicitly. She had the look of someone who had slept badly for several nights in a row, and the particular alertness of someone who checked the room twice before sitting down. She spotted Claire by the window and stopped for a moment, making a decision in real time. Then she walked over. She sat down without preamble. "My name is Karen Shields," she said. "I'm the Director of Patient Quality and Compliance at Mercy General." Claire looked at her. "You're the administrator who called Sandra Okafor." Karen Shields looked at the table, then back at Claire. "Yes. You're also the one who flagged my incident report." A pause, a longer one. "Yes." She said it like it cost her something. "I flagged it because Harold told me to, because that is what I have been doing for 2 years in that hospital. Flagging things when Harold tells me to, and looking away when I'm told to look away, and telling myself that I am managing the situation from the inside." She stopped. "I am done telling myself that." Claire held very still. "What do you know, Karen?" Karen looked around the coffee shop once. Nobody near them. Nobody paying attention. Sandra at her corner table, unmoving. "I know that Dale Morrow has been granted access to this hospital's restricted administrative areas on 4 separate occasions in the past 18 months. Without a formal visitation log, without going through standard security protocols." She folded her hands on the table. "I know that 3 incident reports involving Morrow, 2 from nursing staff, 1 from a resident, were reviewed at the administrative level and buried, not rejected through proper process, buried, filled under a miscellaneous administrative code that effectively makes them invisible to any standard internal audit." Claire felt her pulse move. 3 reports before mine. 4, including yours. Karen's voice was steady, but something underneath it was fraying at the edges. "And I know that the reason those reports were buried is that Dale Morrow has been providing a service to this hospital for the past 2 years that the board does not want to lose. The coffee shop noise continued around them. Ordinary, indifferent. What service? Claire said. Karen looked at her directly. Mercy General has a problem that a lot of mid-sized private hospitals have: patient overflow. Specifically, psychiatric holds and involuntary commitment cases that tie up beds, consume resources, and cost the hospital significant money in extended care that insurance doesn't fully reimburse. She paused. Dale Morrow has been selectively declining to file certain mandatory reports. Cases that should trigger automatic psychiatric holds. Cases that should result in patients being kept in the hospital under observation. Instead, those patients are being released quickly, and the documentation that would have mandated their continued care is never completed. Claire's breath stopped. He's been falsifying law enforcement reports to push patients out, she said. In exchange for what? Cash payments, Karen said, routed through a consulting company that exists on paper only, quarterly, for 2 years. She reached into her bag and set a manila envelope on the table. I have the payment records. I have the incident reports that were buried. I have the access logs showing his off-schedule visits to administrative areas. And I have 3 patient names, people who were discharged because mandatory hold paperwork was never filed, who returned to this hospital within 72 hours in crisis, 2 of whom are now in long-term psychiatric facilities, and one of whom, she stopped. Her jaw tightened. One of whom did not come back. Silence. Claire looked at the envelope on the table. He killed someone. The hospital's liability attorneys would argue causation, Karen said. I am not a lawyer. What I am is the person who found this 18 months ago and spent 17 of those months telling herself she was building a better case before acting, and 1 month knowing she was simply afraid. Her voice broke on the last word, just slightly, just enough. And then I watched what you did. I watched you file that report the same night, and I left you that parking log because I needed you to know you weren't alone. And then I called Sandra Okafor because I needed someone to know what I know before I lose my nerve completely. Claire looked at this woman, this middle-aged woman in professional clothes who had carried something enormous for 17 months and had finally put it on a table in a coffee shop because a night shift nurse had refused to look away. And she felt something complicated and real move through her chest. You're not going to lose your nerve, Claire said, because you're already here. Karen pushed the envelope across the table. There's something else, she said. The text you received this morning, about the video. She met Claire's eyes. That came from Harold. He was in Morrow's car for 40 minutes in the hospital parking garage last night. I don't know how Morrow knows about the video, but Harold does, and Harold panicked, and he told someone to send that text to try to determine whether you'd respond in a way that revealed where the video was stored or who had it. She paused. The text was a probe, not a threat. They don't have the video. They don't know where it is. They're trying to find out. Claire sat very still for a moment. Then she turned her head slightly towards Sandra's corner table. Sandra was already folding her document, standing, moving. By 12:22, the 3 of them were sitting together, the manila envelope open between them, and Sandra was reading with the focused intensity of someone cataloging ammunition. She turned pages with her index finger, methodical and fast, and the expression on her face moved through several distinct phases. Assessment, recognition, something that was almost but not quite satisfaction. Karen, she said without looking up, are you prepared to cooperate formally with the DA's office? Karen said, yes. The payment records are original documents? Copies. The originals are on hospital servers that are now covered by your preservation notice. Sandra looked up. You knew about the preservation notice. I drafted the compliance memo that went out this morning, telling department heads to retain records. A thin, ironic pause. I was told to draft it. I drafted it as broadly as possible. Sandra looked at Claire, and for the first time since Claire had met her, the attorney allowed herself something very close to a full smile. "Ms. Donnelly," she said, "we just went from an assault case to a conspiracy case involving healthcare fraud, falsification of law enforcement documents, institutional bribery, and potentially, pending a full investigation, criminal negligence resulting in death." Claire looked at the table, at the envelope, at Karen Shields' hands, steady now, folded in front of her like someone who has set down a weight and is still figuring out what to do with their empty arms. "The patient who didn't come back," Claire said. "What was their name?" Karen said, "Thomas Ellery, 54 years old, construction worker. He came to our ER on a Tuesday evening in April last year. He was in significant distress. He told the intake nurse he was having thoughts of hurting himself. Under state law, that is a mandatory evaluation trigger. The paperwork should have generated an automatic hold." She stopped, breathed. Morrow was in the hospital that night on one of his off-schedule visits. He spoke with the attending. The paperwork was never completed. Thomas Ellery was discharged at 11:30 p.m. His family reported him missing 3 days later. He was found on the following Saturday. Nobody spoke. The ordinary coffee shop noise moved around them like water around stones. "His family," Claire said quietly. "Do they know?" "They know he was discharged. They don't know why the hold was never filed. They don't know about the payment arrangement." Karen's voice was completely flat now, the flatness of someone who has cried about something so many times that the tears have simply run dry. "They filed a wrongful discharge complaint with the hospital. It was settled, quietly, with an NDA." Claire thought about Thomas Ellery, 54 years old, a construction worker who walked into an emergency room and told someone he needed help. She thought about the intake nurse who had documented his words. She thought about the attending who had spoken with Morrow and then let a man in crisis walk out into a November night. She thought about the mandatory hold paperwork that had never been completed, and she understood, with sudden and total clarity, that this was not a story about Dale Morrow and a bruise on her neck. That had been the surface, the crack in the surface, the small, visible edge of something that went all the way down. "We need to talk to Thomas Ellery's family," Claire said. Sandra said, "That's a separate legal process. The NDA is potentially invalid if it was part of a cover-up of a crime," Claire said. Sandra stopped, looked at her. "You've been thinking about this." "I've been a nurse for 11 years, Claire said. "I know what happens when institutions use paperwork to make people disappear. I know the difference between a legitimate settlement and a document designed to bury someone's grief." She held Sandra's gaze. "Thomas Ellery's family deserves to know what happened to him. Whatever the legal process requires, that has to be part of it." Sandra nodded slowly. "Agreed. We'll get there. Today we focus on getting Karen's evidence to the DA before anything inside that hospital changes." She started gathering the documents back into the envelope. "Karen, I need you to go back to your office. Act normal. Do not speak to Harold. Do not access any of the files we've discussed from your work computer for the remainder of today. Can you do that?" "Yes. And I need you to write down, from memory, every conversation you can recall between yourself and Harold regarding Morrow. Every date, every substance, as specifically as you can remember. On your personal device. Email it to yourself. Do it tonight." Karen stood. She picked up her bag. She looked at Claire for a moment with an expression that was hard to name. Something between relief and grief, and the specific exhaustion of someone who has finally done the thing they should have done a long time ago. "I'm sorry," she said, "for the 17 months. You're here now," Claire said, and meant it the same way she'd meant it when she said it to Marcus Webb, without absolution and without condemnation. Just the simple, practical truth of where they were standing. Karen left. Sandra called the DA's office from the table and spoke for 6 minutes. When she hung up, she said, They want to meet this afternoon, 2 o'clock, both of us, with everything we have. She paused. Claire, this is moving faster than these things usually move. You need to understand what that means. It means they already knew something, Claire said. Sandra looked at her carefully. Admiral Collier's contact at the federal attorney's office. What exactly did Collier tell you about why he was in contact with that office? Claire thought back to the conference room. The quiet certainty in Collier's voice when he said, I recognized a pattern. He said he's been in contact with a federal healthcare oversight board, that they've been building a case against practices in several South Carolina hospitals. Not Mercy General specifically, but adjacent. Sandra was very still for a moment. Claire, is it possible that the federal investigation was already looking in this direction, and the DA moving this fast is because they've been handed confirmation of something they were already building toward? The implications settled over the table like weather changing. You think this goes beyond Mercy General? Claire said. I think, Sandra said carefully, that a rear admiral with a JAG contact in the federal attorney's office, who recognized a pattern he'd seen elsewhere, did not happen to walk into your emergency room by coincidence. I think that the Federal Healthcare Oversight Board he mentioned may have been building towards something that your incident, your report, filed the same night with your name on it, with a civilian video attached, may have just given them exactly what they needed to move. Claire absorbed that. She thought about the paper left at the nursing station. You are not the first. She thought about the parking garage log with a timestamp circled in red. She thought about Karen Shields drafting the preservation notice as broadly as possible. About Amy Tran waiting 14 months for someone to ask her for a statement. About Denise Fowler standing on a porch with a phone in her hand because she couldn't look away. She thought about Thomas Ellery. If the federal investigation was already building, she said slowly, then Morrow's network is bigger than one hospital board, and the people who knew about it and stayed quiet are potentially exposed to federal conspiracy charges depending on their level of involvement, Sandra said, which is why Harold sent that probe text this morning. He's not trying to destroy the video. He's trying to figure out how much time he has. Her phone buzzed on the table. She looked at it. Admiral Collier. A text, not a call. 4 words mirroring the text that had started this chain of events 2 hours ago. But these 4 words were different. We need to talk. Now. She called him immediately. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was the same as it always was. Steady, unhurried, the product of 3 decades of being the person in the room who did not panic regardless of what the room was doing. Where are you? He said. Coffee shop on Rutledge. Sandra's with me. I need you to listen carefully. A brief pause. In the last 40 minutes, 2 things have happened. First, Morrow left the hospital and drove to the precinct. He met with his union representative and a private attorney for approximately 30 minutes. My contact in the federal attorney's office has surveillance on Morrow as of this morning. What he heard from that meeting, through a source inside the precinct I'm not going to name, is that Morrow intends to escalate. He has told his attorney that he plans to file a civil harassment claim against you, and additionally contact a member of the state medical board regarding your nursing license. He is moving aggressively, and he is moving today. Claire felt it move through her, but her voice held. What was the second thing? The second thing, Collier said, and something in his tones shifted in a way that made her grip the phone tighter, is that the Federal Healthcare Oversight Board I mentioned this morning, the one that's been building a case regarding practices in South Carolina hospitals? A pause that felt precisely calibrated. Mercy General has been on their primary watch list for 11 months. Not adjacent. Primary. And the reason they haven't moved yet is that every witness inside the hospital who knew enough to matter has, until this morning, been too afraid to come forward in a way that created a formal evidentiary record. Silence. Until this morning, she repeated, until a night shift nurse filed an incident report the same night she was assaulted, he said, and a civilian witness walked to her door with a video. and a compliance director handed a manila envelope to an attorney in a coffee shop. Another pause. "You opened the door, Miss Donnelly." The federal investigation walked through it. She sat with that for a moment, the weight of it, the strange, terrifying, galvanizing weight of understanding that the things she had done alone, at a nursing station, with trembling hands and a pen and absolute refusal to look away, had connected to something already in motion that was larger than anything she had imagined when she started. She thought about the form Patricia had slid back across the counter. She had picked up the pen anyway. "What do we do about Morrow's escalation?" she said. "The nursing license threat." "Sandra will file a motion today with the state medical board preemptively documenting the harassment and the circumstances," Collier said. "I've already spoken with her about it, but Claire, and I want to be honest with you about this, the next 12 hours are going to be the hardest. Because a man like Morrow, when he understands that the ground is moving under him, becomes more dangerous, not less. Not physically, institutionally. He will pull every lever available to him. He will call every person whose number is in his phone, and some of those people will answer." "I know," she said. "I want to make sure you understand that what you built in the last 36 hours, the report, the video, Amy Tran, Karen Shields, the DA inquiry, none of that disappears because of what he does in the next 12 hours. You have built something real. It doesn't collapse easily." She heard something in his voice that she hadn't heard from many people in her career. Not pity, not reassurance in the empty, professional sense. Something more like one person who had stood in a hard place a long time, talking to another person who was standing in one now, with the specific credibility that comes from having been there. "Thank you," she said, "for this morning, for all of it." "Don't thank me," he said. "Thomas Ellery deserves the thanks. He's the one who should still be here." She hadn't told him Thomas Ellery's name, which meant his federal contact already had it, which meant the investigation had already gone further than she knew. She ended the call and looked at Sandra across the table. 2 o'clock with the DA, she said. "Let's go." They were in the car and moving by 12:51. The manila envelope was in Sandra's briefcase. The voice memo from Claire's first morning was in the cloud. Denise Fowler's video was on a secure server. Amy Tran was ready to give a statement. Marcus Webb had called Sandra at noon with a full written account of his conversation with Amy 14 months ago. Karen Shields was back at her desk, writing from memory with her personal phone. And in a precinct 2 miles away, Dale Morrow was sitting across from a private attorney, laying out his plan to make it all go away. He had done it before. He believed he could do it again. He had no idea that the federal attorney's office had been watching Mercy General for 11 months. No idea that the woman he had dismissed as a disgruntled nurse had in 36 hours assembled a case with more evidentiary weight than most investigators built in 6 months. No idea that a rear admiral with a federal contact had walked through those ER doors at 8:17 and recognized, with 31 years of practiced instinct, exactly what he was looking at. And no idea that Thomas Ellery's sister, who had signed an NDA 18 months ago because she had no money and no lawyer and no energy left after losing her brother, was going to receive a phone call before the end of the day. A phone call that would tell her, for the first time, that what happened to Thomas was not an accident, that someone had known, that someone had kept silent, and that now, finally, someone was not. The DA's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled like old carpet and recycled air, and the elevator was slow enough that Sandra used the ride up to review her notes one final time while Claire stood beside her and thought about Thomas Ellery. 54 years old, construction worker. He had walked into an emergency room and told someone the truth about how he was feeling. And the system that was supposed to protect him had taken money to look the other way. She had been a nurse for 11 years. She had believed, through all of it, that the system was imperfect, but fundamentally oriented toward the people inside it, toward healing, toward care. This was the thing that the last 36 hours had broken open, and forced her to look at directly. Not the imperfection, the deliberate, profitable betrayal of it. The elevator opened. They walked in at 2:03. Assistant District Attorney Rachel Ewan was 41, compact, and had the particular quality of someone who processed information faster than most people generated it. She shook Sandra's hand, then Claire's, and said, "Sit down. I have 45 minutes, and I want to use all of them." No pleasantries, no preamble. Claire immediately respected her. They sat. Sandra opened the briefcase. For the next 38 minutes, Rachel Ewan read. She asked questions that were short and specific, and that told Claire, with each one, exactly how much the DA's office already knew, and exactly where the gaps were. She asked about the timing of Morrow's administrative countercomplaint. She asked about the off-schedule hospital visits in the access logs. She asked about the consulting company listed in Karen Shields' payment records. She asked about Thomas Ellery's discharge date and cross-referenced it against something in a folder she had already opened on her desk before they arrived. That folder, Claire noticed it, thick, tabbed, already annotated in red ink on the edges, which meant Rachel Ewan had been reading before they came in, which meant the DA's office had been preparing before this meeting, which confirmed what Sandra had said in the car and what Admiral Collier had said on the phone. They had already been moving toward this. Claire and her incident report, and Denise Fowler's video, and Karen Shields' envelope had not started the fire. They had provided the oxygen that let it finally burn. At 2:41, Rachel Ewan closed the folder. "Ms. Donnelly," she said, "I want to be honest with you about something, and I want you to hear it clearly. Dale Morrow is going to be arrested. Not today, possibly tomorrow, certainly this week. The evidence you have brought to this office, combined with what we have been developing independently over the past several months, is sufficient for multiple charges including criminal assault, falsification of law enforcement documents, and accepting bribes in connection with his official duties." She held Claire's gaze. "That is the certain part. What is not certain, what I cannot promise you, is what happens to the hospital itself. Civil liability, institutional reform, those processes are longer and less predictable. I want you to know that walking in today is not the end of this. For you personally, for the hospital, for Thomas Ellery's family, it is the beginning of a process that is going to be difficult and public and slow in some of the ways that matter most." Claire said, "I know." "Do you?" Rachel said it without challenge, genuinely, because a lot of people come into this office thinking that providing evidence is the hard part. And I want to make sure you understand that the hard part is everything that comes after. "I've been a nurse for 11 years, Claire said. "I know that saving someone's life in an emergency is the fast part. What comes after? The recovery, the setbacks, the days when it gets worse before it gets better. That's the long part. I know how to stay for the long part." Rachel Ewan looked at her for a moment. Then she made a single note on the pad in front of her and said, "Good, then let's talk about what happens next." It was 3:15 by the time they left the building. The afternoon sun was the kind that Charleston does in November. Warm enough that you don't need a jacket, but with an edge underneath that reminds you winter is real. Claire stood on the sidewalk and breathed it in and felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Not relief, something quieter than that. The specific stillness that comes after a decision has been fully made, and the point of no return is no longer in front of you, but behind you. Sandra said, "You okay?" "Yes," Claire said. And this time it wasn't the version of yes she had given Brianna at 3 in the morning after her first shift. This was a different one. Whole. Her phone rang. The number was one she didn't know. She almost let it go. She answered it. "Is this Claire Donnelly?" A woman's voice, older, something careful and raw in it simultaneously. "Yes. My name is Judith Ellery. Thomas was my brother." A pause. "I received a call today from an attorney's office. They said you might be calling me. I didn't want to wait." Claire stopped walking. Sandra stopped beside her. Miss Ellery, Claire said carefully, I'm very sorry about your brother. They told me, the woman's voice held, barely. They told me that it wasn't an accident, that he was supposed to be kept, that someone made sure he wasn't. A long pause filled with the specific sound of someone keeping themselves together through sheer force of will. I signed a paper. After he died, they gave me money and a paper and I signed it because I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't have anyone telling me I had options. You had options that they didn't tell you about, Claire said. Ms. Ellery, my attorney is going to call you. Her name is Sandra Okafor. She is going to explain what your rights are and what the investigation means for the settlement you signed. You are going to have the chance to be part of this. A silence. Then, I just want people to know what happened to him. I don't want money. I want people to know he went in there asking for help and they sent him home. They will know, Claire said. I promise you. She ended the call. Her hand was shaking. Not the way it hadn't shaken when she'd filled out the incident report 2 mornings ago. This was different. This was the shake that comes not from fear, but from the full weight of understanding what was at stake. Thomas Ellery had gone into an emergency room and asked for help. He had trusted a system that was supposed to be built around exactly that moment. The moment a person is at their lowest and reaches out. And the system had taken money to turn him away. That was what this was actually about. Not her neck, not her career, not Dale Morrow's badge, or David Harrell's carpeted office, or any of the institutional machinery that had spent 2 days trying to make her disappear. It was about a 54-year-old man who deserved to walk out of an emergency room with care instead of a discharge slip. She looked at Sandra. How do we make sure his name is part of the public record when this breaks? Sandra said, the DA will include him in the charging documents. Once those are public, the press will do the rest. She paused. And the press is going to come, Claire. This story, a police officer, hospital fraud, a covered patient death, it's going to be significant news. I need you to be prepared for that. I know. I need you to be prepared for Morrow's side to give their version of you first. I know that too. They drove back toward the hospital because Claire had left her car in the staff lot and because there was something she needed to do there that couldn't wait. She texted Admiral Collier from the passenger seat. Meeting done. DA moving. Are you still at the hospital? He responded in under a minute. Room 212. Come find me when you're ready. She found him at 420, sitting in a chair beside Captain Ray Hendricks's bed. Hendricks was a man of 70, white-haired and thin, with the particular thinness of someone who had been genuinely ill. And when Claire came in, he looked at her with eyes that were sharp and present and said, You must be the nurse Jim won't stop talking about. Despite everything, she almost smiled. I haven't done anything worth talking about yet. Jim says you filed a report the same night a cop put his hands on you, Hendricks said. In this town, in this hospital, with that man's connections, I'd call that something worth talking about. Collier said from the chair. How did it go? The DA is moving, Claire said. 48 hours, maybe less. She looked at Collier directly. You knew. About Thomas Ellery. About the federal investigation being focused here. You knew before you walked in this morning. He didn't deny it. I knew the investigation existed. I didn't know the details of what was inside this hospital until you and Karen Shields filled them in today. He held her gaze. I want to be clear about something. I came to this hospital this morning to see Ray. That is true. But when my contact at the federal attorney's office told me 3 weeks ago that Mercy General was on their primary watch list, he also told me that the single thing they were missing was an internal witness willing to go on record. Someone inside the institution who had filed formal documentation and could not be dismissed as external. Someone who had put their name on paper and would not take it back. He paused. I was not sent here looking for you, but when I saw your neck in that hallway and I saw the man by the front entrance and I understood what was happening, I made a choice about how to use what I know. Claire absorbed that. You were a catalyst, she said, not a coincidence. I prefer to think of it as being in the right place at the right time and choosing not to ignore it, he said, which is, in the end, all you did too. Captain Hendricks said from the bed, I told him years ago he never learned how to stay out of other people's problems. He said it with the warmth of someone who was deeply glad that was true. At 4:53, Claire's phone rang. Sandra. She stepped into the hallway. Something's happening, Sandra said. Her voice had a different quality now. Not alarmed, but accelerated. Morrow's attorney called the DA's office 20 minutes ago. He's requesting a meeting. Tonight. He knows it's coming, Claire said. He knows something is coming. He doesn't know the full scope yet. He doesn't know about Karen's documents or the federal connection. He's still operating under the assumption that this is a local assault case with a civilian video and a couple of scared hospital employees. A pause. But here's what that call tells us. It tells us that someone inside the DA's office or inside the federal attorney's office has a connection to Morrow's network and tipped him that the situation is worse than he thought. The cold moved through Claire again. There's a leak. There's a leak, Sandra confirmed, which means the timeline for Morrow's arrest may compress significantly. Rachel Ewan called me directly 5 minutes ago. She's moving the warrant request to tonight. She doesn't want to give him time to destroy anything or run. Claire pressed her back against the hallway wall and thought fast. Karen, is Karen safe? I've already called her. She's been instructed to go home, not to return to the hospital tonight, and to send everything she's written from memory to my server in the next 30 minutes. Brianna, Kevin, the people who were in that doorway, they're not in immediate risk. Morrow doesn't know yet which witnesses have come forward. Sandra paused. Claire, go home. Tonight, let this happen without you in the middle of it. You have done what you needed to do. Let the law do what it does. She didn't go home immediately. She went back to Gerald Morrow's room first, because she was still a nurse, and Gerald Morrow was still her patient. And the man in that bed had said, I'm sorry, with a shame that had nothing to do with what his son was, and everything to do with what it felt like to watch someone you raised become a person who hurt people and got away with it. Gerald was awake. He looked at her when she came in. He looked at her neck. He said, They're arresting him, aren't they? She said, I can't speak to that, Mr. Morrow. He looked at the ceiling. I've been making excuses for 30 years, he said. Every time, every complaint, every story that came back to me about the way he treated people. I told myself it wasn't as bad as it sounded, that he was under pressure, that the job did things to you. A long exhale. He didn't get like this because of the job. The job just gave him permission. Claire stood at the foot of his bed. Your antibiotic drip is on schedule. Your oxygen levels have been stable all day. The doctor will be in at 6 to review your morning labs. Gerald looked at her. You're going to take care of me even after? You're my patient, she said simply. That doesn't change. He turned his face toward the window. When he spoke again, his voice was very quiet. I'm sorry, he said, for what he did to you, and for what he did to everyone else I probably don't know about. She didn't tell him about Thomas Ellery. That wasn't her information to give in this room, in this moment. But she held the weight of that name in her chest as she left the room, the way she had learned to hold the names of patients she lost. Not letting them go, not letting them become abstract, keeping them specific and real and human. 6:17 p.m. She was in the parking lot, keys in hand, when Brianna appeared behind her. Claire! She was breathless, like she'd run to catch up. I heard someone in the break room said Morrow might be... Brianna, I want to give a statement. She said it fast, like she'd been building up the pressure to say it all day and couldn't hold it anymore. I was in that doorway. I saw what he did. I looked away and I have felt sick about it every single hour since. And I want to give a statement. Can I call your attorney? Claire looked at her, at the young nurse who had student loans and a lease and a mother on her insurance, and who had sat beside her at 3 a.m. and said I should have said something. Yes, she said. Call Sandra Okafor. Tell her I said to expect your call. Brianna nodded. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were clear. Thank you, she said. You're doing the right thing, Claire said, even though it's hard. Especially because it's hard, Brianna said, and walked back toward the hospital doors with the specific posture of someone who has made a decision they intend to keep. Claire drove home. She heated soup she didn't taste. She sat at the kitchen table where Thomas Ellery's name had been absent and present simultaneously for the last several hours, and she called her sister. Margaret picked up immediately. Tell me, Claire told her. All of it. The DA meeting, Judith Ellery's call, the leak in Morrow's network, the warrant moving to tonight, the moment with Gerald, Brianna in the parking lot. Margaret was quiet through all of it. Then, Mom would have done exactly what you did. Claire hadn't expected that. It landed somewhere deep and specific. You think? Mom put her name on things, Margaret said. She signed things when signing was dangerous. You know that story about the patient transfer policy she fought in the 90s when they threatened to cut her hours? She filed that grievance alone. Every other nurse was scared. She filed it alone, and she won. A pause. You come from a long line of women who sign their names when it costs something. Claire held the phone and felt the full day pressing down on her. The weight of 36 hours compressed into the space between her shoulder blades. And she did not cry, but it was close. Stay on the phone with me for a bit, she said. I'm not going anywhere, Margaret said. It was 8:44 in the evening when Sandra called. The warrant has been issued. Her voice was controlled and precise. Dale Morrow was taken into custody 40 minutes ago at his home. He is currently being processed. The charges as filed include criminal assault in the first degree, falsification of official law enforcement records, and acceptance of bribes in connection with official duties. The DA has indicated that additional charges are expected as the federal investigation formally absorbs the case. A brief pause. Additionally, David Harrell was escorted from the hospital by federal agents at 8:15. He has not been charged yet. He is being interviewed. Karen Shields provided a full written account to the federal investigators this evening. She was in that office for 2 hours. Claire didn't speak for a moment. Is Harrell cooperating? She finally asked. His attorney arrived 20 minutes into the interview, Sandra said dryly. Make of that what you will. The nursing board, Morrow threatened, filed and immediately flagged as retaliatory, documented as part of the formal case record, and the board has been notified by the DA's office. It will go nowhere. Outside Claire's kitchen window, the city was doing what cities do at night, moving, unaware, indifferent to the specific gravity of what had just shifted inside one of its hospitals. Somewhere out there, Dale Morrow was in a processing room with his badge no longer on his chest. Somewhere out there, Karen Shields was driving home from a federal building with the specific lightness of someone who has set down a thing they carried too long. Somewhere out there, Amy Tran was in Colombia, and Denise Fowler was wherever she had been when she pressed record on her phone. And Brianna was finishing her shift with a different posture than the one she'd had this morning. And somewhere out there, Judith Ellery was sitting with the knowledge that her brother's death was not invisible anymore. Sandra, Claire said, what happens to Thomas Ellery's case now? The NDA is almost certainly voidable, Sandra said, because the settlement was entered into without the hospital disclosing that the departure from standard care was deliberate and financially motivated. Fraud voids contracts. Judith Ellery's attorney, and she will have a very good attorney by the end of this week, I will personally see to that, will argue that the NDA is unenforceable. The hospital's liability in Thomas's death will be part of the civil proceedings that follow the criminal case. Will she be heard? Yes, Sandra said. She will be heard. Claire was quiet for a moment. What about me? My job? My position at the hospital? Mercy General is in no position to take adverse action against you, Sandra said. Any attempt to discipline or terminate you would be textbook retaliation against a protected whistleblower and would add to an already very significant legal exposure. You are, as of tonight, one of the most legally protected employees in that building. A brief pause. That said, what you do with your career going forward is your choice. You have options you may not have considered yet. She knew what Sandra was suggesting without saying it, that a nurse who had done what she had done, who had documented what she had documented, who had built what she had built in 36 hours with nothing but a pen and a principle, that person had a different kind of standing than she'd had 2 mornings ago. I'm going back to work on Thursday, Claire said. Same shift, same ER. Sandra made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was adjacent to it. Of course you are. After she hung up, she sat for a long time at the kitchen table. She wasn't thinking about Morrow in a processing room, or Harrell in a federal interview, or the case that would unfold over the coming months in courtrooms, in depositions and press conferences she would be asked to attend. She was thinking about 11 years, the long accumulation of them, the patients whose names she still carried, the shifts that had broken something in her, and the ones that had rebuilt it. The night her mother had sat at a kitchen table, very much like this one, and said the hardest part is the institution. She had believed at 23 that caring enough was sufficient armor. She understood now that armor was made of different things, of documentation, of people who answered the door late at night with a phone in their hand, of attorneys who cleared their afternoons, of retired admirals who noticed things and chose not to look away, of young nurses who ran across parking lots to say, I want to give a statement, of compliance directors who finally, after 17 months, put something on a table in a coffee shop, of a man named Thomas Ellery who walked into an emergency room and told the truth. The armor was made of all of them, and it held. Thursday morning, Claire Donnelly walked back through the doors of Mercy General at 6:58 a.m. and went directly to the nursing station. Patricia Hollis was there, 25 years, the woman who had slid the form back across the counter and then watched Claire pick up the pen anyway. Patricia looked at her. Her expression was complicated in the way that expressions get when a person has spent several days being quietly ashamed of a choice they made and equally quietly grateful that someone else made a different one. How are you doing? Patricia said. I'm good, Claire said, and meant it fully. What do we have this morning? Patricia handed her the chart. 2 overnight admissions, 1 pending discharge that needed coordination, a family in the waiting room that had been there since 4 a.m. and needed to be updated about their father, who had come in by ambulance and was now stable and asking for coffee. Claire took the chart. She went to work. She did not think about Morrow being arraigned at 10 that morning, though she knew it was happening. She did not think about the press gathering outside the hospital, though she had seen them on her way in. She did not think about the federal case or the DA's timeline or the civil proceedings that would follow, though all of it was real and moving and would require her attention in the weeks ahead. She thought about the family in the waiting room, the father who was stable and asking for coffee, the small, specific, irreplaceable gift of being the person who walked out and told a frightened family that the person they loved was going to be okay. At 8:17 in the morning, exactly 24 hours after Admiral James Collier had walked through those same ER doors in Silver Stars and changed the architecture of everything, Claire Donnelly stood in a hospital hallway and delivered that news to a family of 4 who had been sitting in plastic chairs since 4 a.m. The oldest daughter grabbed her hand. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Claire held her hand and said, "He's asking for coffee. I'll see what we can do about that." And she walked back to work. Because that was who she was. That was who she had always been. And now, finally, the institution she served would have to become worthy of it. Some people move through the world quietly and get swallowed by it. Claire Donnelly moved through it quietly and refused to be swallowed. And in doing so, she held a door open long enough for the truth to walk through. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the only thing that has ever changed anything. Not the powerful, not the connected, not the ones who played golf with board members and knew which calls to make. The ones who picked up the pen. The ones who said no quietly and meant it completely. The ones who understood that silence, in the face of what is wrong, is its own kind of answer, and chose a different one.